So this one here is going to be in regards to allocating the loss that was generated from a partnership amongst the partners. I already did a video in regards to how to allocate income that was generated by the partnership amongst the partners. So this one is going to be how to allocate the loss. So it's the same scenario as you can see here as the video that I actually recorded in regards to allocating the income amongst the partnership, with the exception of, well, with the addition of adding an example of when a partnership generates a loss. What do you do there? So I'm going to actually draw on here so that way we can see that we're not focused on the whole problem here, just a couple of, I want to say, scenarios here. So we want to pay attention to, okay, hopefully that can drop down. There we go. We want to pay attention to, of course, this scenario here. And also this portion here, because this portion here is giving us our net loss amount of $18,000. And we want to look at number 2, number 4, and then number 6. So numbers 1, 3, and 5, that was already done in a video called Income Allocation to Partners. I believe that's the name of the video. Okay, so we only focused on, well, the scenario and number 2, 4, and 6. So given the scenario here, Bob and Frank began a partnership. Bob invested $85K into the partnership and Frank invested $65K into the partnership. Bob and Frank Barbecue, that's the name of the company, had a net loss of $18,000 in year 1. So I'm just going to put this over here, 18,000 as a net loss. The brackets means it's a minus, it's a loss. So for number 2, prepare calculations showing how the $18,000 net loss is allocated when it's shared equally in year 1. Well, if it's shared equally in year 1, I'll just scroll down here at the very bottom. You see here that when you divide 18,000 by 2, that's going to give you $9,000. So the $9,000 loss is going to be distributed to Bob and Frank each. So that's taking care of number 2. That easy for number 2. Number 4, prepare calculations showing how the $18,000 net loss is allocated based on the proportion of their initial investments for year 1. Let's see. So we're paying attention to number 4. Okay, we already did number 2. So for number 4, the initial investment from Bob was $85,000. Frank was $65,000. When you total those up together, you get $150,000. So to figure out what percentage needs to be allocated to Bob, you're going to take $85,000 here, and you're going to divide it by $150,000, the total amount of the investments. And that's going to give you 57%, which means that 57% of the loss of 18,000 is going to be distributed to Bob of $10,200. Frank had an initial investment of 65,000. Okay, let me erase this. So Frank had an initial investment of 65,000. So since the total investments amongst the partners was 150,000, 65,000 divided by 150, that's going to give you your 43%. That 43% is the percent that's going to be used to allocate the $18,000 loss to Frank. So pretty much from the $18,000, Frank is going to share 43% of it. So Frank is taking 43% of that loss in his account, which means that 43% of 18,000 is going to give you $7,800. Okay, so to pretty much just make sure that the calculations are correct, make sure that all of the losses accounted for. You take $10,200, add it to $7,800. That's going to give you your $18,000, and we're good to go for number 4. Okay, last one here. Prepare a calculation showing how the $18,000 net loss is allocated based on the information that's below. Now, before we look at that information, I mean, it's already done here for number 6, but I want to set it up to where you can understand it better. So I'm going to put the loss over here, 18,000. So this indicates that this is the loss that the company generated, and we need to allocate the full loss amongst Bob and Frank. So out of 18,000, based on number 6, how much of the loss is going to go towards Bob? How much of it is going to go towards Frank? Now, yes, you can see the answer is already here. Bob is going to take home $1,375, so $1,375 as a loss. Frank is going to take $16,625 as a loss. So that's already done. But what I want to do is just show you all step by step how to get to that answer. So I put the loss over here on the far right side. Then in the middle, I'm going to put over here Bob, a section for Bob, and then a section for Frank. Now I'm going to go back up here and go to the first bullet point. So Bob was given $30,000 salary allowance for the year, along with a 10% interest on his initial capital investment. So I want to take this step by step, or within 2 parts. So I want to focus on the salary allowance that Bob was given. Bob was given $30,000 salary allowance, and that's it. I'm not going to read on. So I want to take care of the salary allowance here for Bob. So underneath Bob, I'm going to put on here salary allowance. And Bob was given a salary allowance of $30,000. Now I'm going to scroll back up here to the problem and then read on. Along with a 10% interest on his initial capital investment. All right, 10% interest on the initial capital investment, and I have to figure out what the initial capital investment was from Bob. And so the initial capital investment from Bob was $85,000. So I'm going to put on here right below the salary allowance underneath Bob, interest allowance. And it's 10% of $85,000. Okay, that's going to give us $8,500. So we're good there with Bob, with including all of the salary and the interest allowances. Next, we're going to go to this second bullet point here, to Frank. Frank was given $20,000 salary allowance for the year, along with a 5% interest on his initial capital investment. So taking it step by step, we're going to first focus on including the salary allowance that was given to Frank of $20,000. Okay, so I'm going to put on here salary allowance for Frank was $20,000. Then I'm going to read on. Along with a 5% interest on his initial capital investment. So what was Frank's initial capital investment? It was $65,000. So interest allowance. And we're going to take 5% of 65,000. Let's see. So 5% of 65,000. I think that is 3250. There we go. 3250. So we scroll back up here and okay, so the first 2 bullet points are correct. So before we get to the last bullet point, I'm just going to scroll down here and we're going to have to do some addition and some subtraction here. Well, no, just some additions. Okay, so on Bob's side, we're going to have to now add the salary allowances and interest allowances together, and that's going to give us $38,500. And for Frank, that gives us $23,250. Okay, that's, I want to say, step one. Step two, we're going to now have to add this 38,500 from Bob to Frank's $23,250. And when we do that, we should get $61,750. Okay. Now, one thing that I didn't say in the last video or in the video that's in regards to income allocation to partners is that the salary allowances here and the interest allowances, these are not salary and interest expenses when it comes to trying to identify or classify what the allowances are. So I don't want you all to get mixed up or get confused thinking that, oh, this is salaries expense and this is interest expense. These are just allowances that are provided to Bob and Frank in case they're not able to come to an agreement to, share the income and loss equally, or to share the income or loss based on their initial capital investment. So this is just another way to allocate the income or loss. That's it. So now the next thing we're going to do, which is step two, is we're going to take this $18,000 loss here. Okay, $18,000 loss here. And we're going to also, how can I say this? We're pretty much going to add the $18,000 loss to the $61,750 amount here. But what I mean by add, I mean this loss here of $18,000 is going to, in order for us to allocate the $61,750 appropriately to Bob and Frank, we're going to have to make this $61,000 as a negative as well. So that way, when we add $18,000 to $61,000, that's going to actually bring up the loss from $18,000 to, let's see what it is. $79,750. So it just increases that loss. So hopefully that makes sense. Because again, we're just trying to allocate this $18,000 loss based on the salary allowances and interest allowances that were provided to Bob and Frank in the business. That's it. Okay, so we're going back up here. Now the next thing we're going to do is, if I can zoom in, we're going to go to this last bullet point here. And now we're going to take that balance, that $79,750, and we're going to now share that balance equally amongst Bob and Frank. So this means that we're going to take $79,750 and we're just going to divide it by 2. And that's going to give us $39,875, which means that we're going to take that amount and we're going to bring it over here as a minus, as a deduction for Bob and Frank. Okay, last thing we're going to do is we're going to take, now this is Bob's section here. We're going to take the $38,500 that's here, and we're going to subtract it from $39,875 because this $38,000 here is a positive amount. So this subtracting it from $39,875 is actually going to bring the balance down to a negative $1,375, since $39,000 is a negative number and is greater than $38,500, which is a positive amount. Then we go to Frank. Take the $23,250, subtract it from $39,875. That's going to give us a loss of $16,625. So out of $18,000, well, first, before I get to that, I want to do a check and make sure that this $13,775 and $16,625, does indeed add up to the $18,000 loss that was generated. So I'm going to take 1375, add it to the 16625, and that's going to give me 18,000. So out of this $18,000 loss for Bob, he's going to get $1,375 of it. Frank, he's getting a big chunk of it of $16,625. Okay, so we go back up here at number 6. You can see that what I did reflects how the setup that I have it up here in this spreadsheet.